when I started at the beginning of the semester, I had no idea what my connection was to restorative justice. And I didn't really know what my connection was until I started having some really powerful conversations with other students of the CJP program at EMU. And through those conversations, I started to realize restorative justice, and the conversations that I had about restorative justice made me realize what I'm holding back in myself. So restorative justice at first seemed very inextricably linked to criminal justice and the legal system and systems of incarceration and, Western legal processes.
I want to share because I'm a recipient of restorative justice. It would introduce to me back in 1993 while I was serving a 20-year prison sentence. And during that period, I met a man named Howard Zare. And I just had one conversation with him, and it changed the rest of my life. And 20 years later, or 20-something years later, I'm here today. As a person who has been on the other side of the street, committing crime and doing harm to others, now I have a chance to make amends and bring healing to others, just as I harmed others, as well as help other men and women who are also in my situation that need a way out of that situation. And I want to help. I want to be that linchpin to their resilience and bouncing back and having a full and healthier life that we all want at some point in our lives. Some.
What I learned and what I really was able to connect with was this idea that restorative justice is about restoring harm done. And it's not just in the context of, like Law and Order SVU, right? It's not just in the context of, what happens in the courtroom and after, but it also looks at collective traumas of communities, individual traumas. And I think that's where it really resonated with me. My experience with my own personal trauma has sort of held me back in terms of being vulnerable, and conversations about restorative justice sort of enabled me to feel comfortable in addressing my vulnerabilities and sort of realizing that I am worthy of healing, and that I can find meaning in my traumas. I can find healing in my trauma by looking back at those moments and realizing that who I am as a person came out of those moments. I can't change what happened to me, but instead of thinking of myself as someone who's broken, I can think of myself as someone who has a lot of empathy and doesn't want to hurt other people because she knows what it's like to be hurt herself, right? Some of my greatest strengths as an advocate and as a person come from what I've taken away, the positives that I've taken away from something really terrible that happened in my life. And so that is what restorative justice means to me. It's not forgetting what happened in my past, but it's being able to let even the dark parts of my past inform who I am in the world. And so that was a really powerful sort of lesson in healing in and of itself.
Well, restorative justice, I was kind of exposed to it more through this circle process training that I took last year. And the trainer, Kay Pranis, has been trained in a lot of Native American spiritual traditions and sort of healing and community. And she talks about the restorative justice in the context of the circle metaphor, and the idea that everything is connected, which is sort of a principle of my faith background too. I'm Unitarian Universalist, and that's one of the principles. But I never thought about it in a very profound, like, life truth way until she was talking about it. And she was saying, like, it's like our waste systems. You know, we send our waste off to landfills instead of composting, you know, reusing. We just use as much as we want, and then what we don't want anymore, we hide and put away. And we pretend like it's out of society, but it's still there, and it's still going to, you know, affect our lives someday. And she's like, no person is disposable either. Like, nothing is disposable. It's all part of the community. And so I've been thinking about that, at what it means to not have disposable people, what it means that nobody can be thrown away, not even nobody should be thrown away, but nobody can be thrown away, like hidden in prisons or even just sort of discounted in an organization or a community. So I guess, yeah, restorative justice making me think about the principle of connectedness and meeting everybody's needs is just changing how I think about my peace building work and bringing communities together to work on issues that are important to them.
So, for example, when I did my internship in Chicago, I was working for the Juvenile Detention Department. So I was working from the RJ side, and I was working with juveniles and the probation officers, and that's, of course, it's the legal part. But still, it was all about relationships. So how the probation officer is getting to know his client and getting to know the school, getting to know his family. It's all about how they interact with each other. So when I say there is restoring the relationships, is not only about making things.
I think, yeah, the principle of addressing harm, and the RJ's right, restorative justice, the idea that you need to restore rather than just punish, and I in my own future work, hopefully, we'll be looking at historical harms and societal harms and community harms. And then how do we grapple with things like the legacy of slavery and segregation? How do we grapple with the war on terror and the effects on the relationships between Muslims and non-Muslims in the United States, things like that. And so, yeah, restorative justice principles are really helpful in thinking about moving beyond the idea of punishment or going free with harm, because that's not helpful.
So it's reconstructing, rebuilding the story. It's how we, by acknowledging our harms and what happened and our needs, and just asking to the other or just saying and talking about it, how can we are co-creating a space that will change and transform those relationships. And of course, you can see RJ from different angles, but when you are talking about relationships, and this is my approach, and this is what I believe, but for others, that could be, the focus could be the legal system, you know? For me, it's all about relationships.
And we all have a question we want to ask: why? Whether your spouse hit you, why you hit me? Whether your spouse cheated on me, why you cheated on me? Whether I committed a crime, and the victim one asks, why did you pick me as your victim? For many years I have said, I didn't do it. I even put my hand on a Bible in court and said, I didn't do it. But through restorative justice, it made me really understand that I did do it, and what part did I play?
Why I'm doing this is because I truly believe that RJ can heal a lot of communities. So for example, in my country, there are so many different programs aimed for the DDR processes, so the demobilization, disarmament, and reintegration processes of different guerrilla or paramilitary groups. But they have not been very successful when they go back to their communities. So that's the other side, how victims and perpetrators live next to each other, and also they're immersed and embedded in communities that were also harmed. So how you restore and how can you restore relationships?
But then just from being like experiencing the people in the CJP classroom and stuff, just from talking to them and how their stories carry so much weight, and that people deserve to be heard. People deserve to voice themselves. People deserve to, use their own power and not be powerless. They deserve to be empowered. But that just comes from being willing to listen. That just comes from suspending your assumptions. That just comes from being open to those interactions, being open to change, open to transformation. And I mean, their stories are transformative. And stories is a tool for transformation if one is open to listening and to be receptive. I think that was probably the most powerful thing that I learned this semester within the class of CJP, and how that can be kind of like applied to the overarching principle, like what restorative justice is, and like this peace building kind of perspective.
So when I first started this experience this semester, one of the things that I wasn't sure how to address in my advocacy was what's sort of the appropriate container for my privilege, right? And I sort of had this mental barrier go up, like, how can I advocate for people who have been through horrible things that I haven't been through? Because I think I was still approaching advocacy as, how do I speak for these people? How do I speak on behalf of these people, right? And I learned two things from that. One, it's not about speaking on behalf of anybody.
Those doors were literally open. They gave me the chance to see them, and I was willing to see them. I was willing to listen, and I was willing to learn. And I learned a lot, and most importantly, that there should be that I should be more open to trusting people, and I should be more faithful.
I've heard these incredible stories from my classmates of like forgiveness, and like the transformation it made possible in their lives, and either when they forgave somebody else or they were forgiven. And I'm in playback theater, and we've played back some of those stories, and it's just like, if more people could hear them, could experience the power of real emotions that have real impact on real people's lives. I mean, we hear about forgiveness as this abstract concept, or RJ as this technocratic thing, but it's not. It's stories of people's lives becoming better from something that was terrible. And I just wish more people could know that.
People are the way that they are because of their past experiences, which shouldn't hinder or impede on how you perceive them, but that it's not a burden that they carry, but a burden that should be shared. And so, a couple of the individuals that I met specifically that have been formerly incarcerated, right? It's the opportunity for them that they are so grateful for, that people gave them a second chance, that people were willing to have faith and trust in them, but most importantly, that they had faith and trust in themselves.
It's not about speaking on behalf of others. It's creating space for others to speak for themselves, right? And so that's a completely different approach to advocacy, and I think it's a more invitational one. But I think the second thing that I learned is that I don't need to have the same experiences as everyone that I come into contact with in order to, sort of have this moment, like this coming together. But my own experiences have brought me some good times and bad times, right? And what I've learned from that, what I've taken from that emotionally, those sort of emotional and visceral responses to the things that have happened to me, that's the connection point, right? So it's not about walking the same path as someone else. It's about the human experience. And the human experience is rooted in empathy.
It has so many different definitions, and I'm struggling to integrate them right now. But for me, really, really, it's a way where victims and offenders and society can come together and talk. It just gives a different perspective of the needs and the harms and how can you address them. So for example, in my context that I come from Colombia, RJ has provided me a different lens to analyze the conflict. It's not only talking about victims and their needs, but also how the perpetrators that are called in this framework harm doers, and I do agree with that expression, but it's hard for me. To be accountable of what they did.
We're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I believe totally into that because we all are made up of the same. We all have the same 5 or 7 senses. We each hurt, we each feel, we're just human beings. And I believe that we got away from seeing each other in that perspective. When I see you, I should see me. I should see my flaws. So if I know that I got flaws, then I'm not going to look at your flaws. And that'll keep me from being less judgmental. That'll keep me from even wanting to harm you or commit crimes against you, whether you my mate or just a bystander, just a stranger, you know what I mean? So from that position, I just have to go back and say, hey, restorative justice to me is just a place of healing. And then you can define it the way that you want to define it within those parameters. But healing has no parameters because you never know when you're going to heal.
Restorative justice means no one is disposable.
Restorative justice is forgiveness. And it's not just forgiving the perpetrator. I think it's also about forgiving yourself.
Restorative justice is hopeful.
Restorative justice is patience, because you can't expect wounds to heal overnight. And even when they do heal, you still carry those scars with you. But it's being patient and trusting in the process.
Restorative justice is faith-based, and not necessarily like the faith, like religious, like that religiosity aspect, but that faith in like knowing that when you open yourself up to somebody, they won't hurt you back.
There's another side of RJ that I also love, and it's the symbolic side. It's how you see the unseen when you are in a circle process, for example.
And restorative justice is hope. Because in order for there to be restoration, there had to have been a point in time where something was broken or harmed or traumatized. And that evokes a deep feeling of despair. And so restorative justice offers a space for hope that out of those desperate moments can come something beautiful.